As Mark Zuckerberg gets ready to testify, let's talk about regulation. What can Congress do to regulate a company like Facebook, if anything? Let's bring in our panel as we wait for the Senate hearing to begin. Stefanie Miller is senior analyst with Height Capital Markets, a D.C. research firm. Jimmy Pethokoukis is an economic policy analyst with AEI, as well as a CNBC contributor. And John Fort is CNBC's technology correspondent. Mr. Fort, welcome. Good to be sitting next to you.
Yeah, good to be here.
My neighbor, John.
Thank you so much.
Stefanie, what can Congress do to regulate this company? I guess it depends. Michelle asked a very good question a few minutes ago. Whether it depends on how you define Facebook, whether it's a media company or something different.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely define Facebook as an advertising revenue company. But what Congress can do is pretty broad if they want to. I just don't think they're going to be capable of doing very much. Broad, what folks in the industry refer to as an omnibus data security or privacy legislation, it's going to take a long time to get this Congress kind of coalesced around some ideas. We'll start to maybe see some hints at what some different members might be thinking right now, but in terms of real agreement around a broad package here, it's hard to imagine.
Which party would be more inclined to regulate a company like Facebook? The Democrats or the Republicans, Stefanie?
So the Democrats, of course, are less worried about bigger government, and they tend to like regulations more, but they're actually very close with Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is a nice source of fundraising dollars for Democrats, so they're also kind of torn here. But right now, I think one of the things that will be harmful to their cause is I assume and expect they will focus today a lot on the Russia meddling in the 2016 investigation, and they're still bitter about Clinton's loss. So I suspect that a lot of this will be more about Russia and less about the Silicon Valley technology companies.
For those people who are listening and maybe on the radio or weren't looking at their screen, and you can't see it either, there were protesters in the audience already that were holding up signs that said, "Protect our privacy, stop corporate spying." So you get a sense of why there's so much interest. Look at all of those people who are in that hearing. It's like standing room only at this point.
John, chime in.
Well, I think what we might be missing here is that the fundamental things that are important to Facebook are not yet really at risk, even in this hearing. And I would say it's people, platform, and prediction. The social graph is really important to Facebook. So anything that kept them from being able to have free reign over knowing who you're connected to and in what way. Platform is the like button. A few years ago, they did an amazing thing. They basically got all the major properties on the internet to put security cameras, the equivalent of security cameras in their shop and let Facebook look in. They can see wherever you go around the internet as long as you're still logged into Facebook. And then their ability to find similar people. They can see all that data, who your friends are, what you're doing on the internet, and then they're able to match that with people who are like you, and they're able to then send advertisers to the right people. None of that is really at risk in this unless Facebook takes, I think, some other leg down and loses people's trust. So Mark Zuckerberg's task here, I think, is more to stanch the bleeding. It's less that there's going to be regulation. I mean, the worst it looks like the U.S. could do, is to do the equivalent of what the EU has done with GDPR. Right. And Facebook's already ready for that. So in a sense, this isn't a big deal as long as Facebook's able to keep it contained to the playing field as it looks right now.
GDPR being General Data Protection rules out of Europe.
Which actually is a big deal. I mean, Goldman Sachs says that could shave about 7% off revenues.
I mean, I don't know if I believe that's really true, because right now, Facebook is the delivery mechanism for so much of the digital economy right now. There's not a lot else that competes with it. I mean, sure, you've got Google search, Amazon is its own ecosystem, but it's not as if just regulating who owns the data and who's able to have recourse if something goes wrong with the data really prevents Facebook from making money necessarily, because, as you said, they've got Instagram, they've got WhatsApp, they've got Facebook Messenger, they've got all these other ways to sort of triangulate who's who on the internet and what they want.
Jimmy, I have a question for you about Facebook's relationship with lawmakers in Washington. We talked about the $11.5 million they spent lobbying last year, the somewhat cozy relationship they seem to have with the Obama administration, and where that stands right now, and who you'll be watching today on that front.
Oh, listen, this is. I know it'd be easy to see this as sort of a kind of a Democrat issue. They like regulation, as was mentioned earlier. But there are groups in both parties right now which are very hostile toward technology for different reasons. We have Democrats who are still very angry about the election and Russia. You have Republicans who think these companies have, picked a side in the culture war, so they're very worried about that. But to me, I think like the real audience here is really not even any of these 40 senators, all right? The audience here is the 2 billion users. And it was mentioned earlier, if those 2 billion users stick, then I just don't think there's a lot of risk here, because I think they're not close to imposing regulation in Congress. And even if it was something like this general data protection regulation, that is only going to cement Facebook's place as an incumbent. They have the data. Telling them to lock it down more inside their walled garden of a company, that's fine. They can deal with that, and that's likely where any of the regulation is going to be.
Jimmy P., you've been in Washington, D.C. a long time. You know how much regulators love good theater. I mean, if you could see the video of this thing, I mean, this is unbelievable. I know. How many people
the boy king on trial. I get it, the theater.
Yeah, they love it. They're waiting for him to put his hand up.
They got an audience. That's nice.
They got a big one. Julia Borston is there in that hearing room. We're showing the lines out the door. Julia, I mean, it's insane.
It's definitely very, very crowded, and the room behind me here is packed. You see the photographers crowded around that desk where Zuckerberg will be sitting when he's grilled by those 43 senators. We're expecting him to arrive any minute. It's our understanding that he arrived through the garage and then an elevator upstairs, and he avoided all of the cameras that were trying to stake him out outside. But we expect him to enter from the back of the hearing room. We've seen a lot of his staffers here, senior Facebook executives and some of his communication staff who are already seated in this room behind me. But a lot of interest in how he's going to handle this kind of a crowd. And also, there's some protesters who I just have to say are here. There were some signs. There was a big sort of police security presence that came up to them and took away their signs, but definitely could be a lively audience here, and certainly a packed one. But
Julia,
we'll keep you posted.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but we were just showing a guy with some blue hair that looked like, I don't know if it was a likes. Have any idea what that is related to?
I'm not sure exactly who he is, but there are a couple of people with Delete Facebook T-shirts, hashtag Delete Facebook. We spoke to some of them, and a number of different people in line with different agendas. A lot of people upset about the data that Facebook is collecting on them. Some of them I was surprised to hear haven't necessarily deleted Facebook, but one woman told me that she's wearing the Delete Facebook T-shirt. She's here today to learn and see what Zuckerberg has to say, and if she doesn't feel satisfied by his answers, she will delete Facebook.
Thanks, Julia. It's so hard, John, to actually delete Facebook, and I think this is the key thing. Not it's hard to delete Facebook, but what happens with the users? Isn't that what it all comes down to for investors and for the business, for Zuckerberg, for Sandberg? Yes, this is a lot of noise and probably unpleasant, but as long as they can keep the billions of people on Facebook, that's their bread and butter.
That is their bread and butter. And they don't even have to, I don't think, keep all the people. Right? If a few people leave, especially if they leave for a while, I mean, there are always those fringe people who really don't use Facebook that much anyway, and if they drop out,
you said fringe people, not French people. You said French people.
Yeah, there's some French people.
Those French people.
Those
people
French
leave and
people
they'll go to
too.
Instagram.
French people. Yeah, you meant I meant French people. So I don't think that's so much the danger, but it is people not trusting Facebook, logging out as they go around the internet, so Facebook doesn't have the same amount of intelligence about what people are doing, how they're engaging commercially. Anything that shuts them off, particularly in emerging markets, from communications and commerce networks that are just beginning to form. If this kind of hearing environment in the U.S. and eventually in Europe gives other countries an excuse to be more hostile to Facebook, that would be bad for him. So I think he's more on a diplomatic mission here, as others were saying, to the users and to a broader audience.
All right, we're going to continue with our panel after we take a little 2-minute break as we await Mark. Oh, we're going to keep going? I think you said take a break. I beg your pardon. Stefanie,
yes.
How big a problem, sort of existentially, do you think this is for Facebook? I mean, the history of data breaches, as Andrew Ross Sorkin pointed out in this morning's New York Times, is that people walk away for a little bit and then they come back, or they don't walk away at all. They tut-tut and they huff and they stomp and so on and so forth. But generally, they continue to shop at Target, or they continue to go to Home Depot, or they continue to use Yahoo.
Right, or they wear a delete Facebook shirt but haven't quite deleted Facebook yet, which I love that data point. I mean, I think that one of the biggest problems for Facebook and Google, for that matter, and some of these other kind of conglomerate technology companies is going to be if any government prohibits them from sharing data across their different platforms. And so all these things we've been talking about here, not on the table right now, especially in the US, but even in Europe, is not in a regulatory environment where Facebook can't use my data on Instagram and my data on WhatsApp and build a really, really comprehensive profile. And that is very valuable data to companies, and that's how Facebook makes its advertising revenue. So even if we maintain the users, but we start seeing regulations that creep in and sort of constrain the way that Facebook can put together a picture of me, that is also something that Facebook should be worried about. I will be surprised if I hear much of that at today's hearing in the line of questioning from regulators.
Do you use Facebook, Stefanie? Do you use it?
I do. I know all about the risks.
Are you less inclined to use it today than you were 2 months ago?
Well, let me tell you something special about me. I got an alert from Facebook that I'm one of the people in this Cambridge Analytica breach this morning. That was what I opened this morning.
Oh, that was your data I was reading.
It was. I know. Did you see my likes?
I liked you. Yeah, I liked you. Exactly. No, I don't use Facebook. So
One question.